Welcome to the WOCNCB Certification Inspiration Podcast. My name is Lisa Obradovic, Marketing Manager for WOCNCB. In 2023, WOCNCB is celebrating 45 years. In 1978, the Nursing Certification Board was established, and in 1979, the first certification exams were administered. To celebrate this milestone and highlight the specialty, we invited a few of our longest continually certified nurses to discuss the inspiration to become certified, the changes in the specialty, their practice, and their role over the years. The WOCNCB certified nurses joining us today are Janice Colwell, Mary Gloeckner, Bonnie Rolstad, and Ruth Bryant. All of them have been active leaders in wound ostomy continence nursing on the local, national, and international level, as well as published authors in peer-reviewed journals and textbooks, recognized national and international speakers, and of course, all are mentors and true advocates for WOCNCB certification. Also joining us is Jessica Simmons, WOCNCB President, who will be starting the conversation. Welcome everyone, and thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for meeting today. I can tell you that when I saw your names come through as being certified continuously for the longest amount of time, all of your names were familiar. And whether it was through publications that I've seen, through working with you on the certification board in the past, or even as I'm a WebWOC alumni, so as being educated by you, you're all people that I really look up to. So I'm thrilled to be here and get to ask you some questions today. So I'd like to start out with just asking, what inspired you to pursue the WOCNCB certification?
This is Ruth, and I have to say, I was excited to take the certification. You know, I think it was the first time it was offered. It was either in DC or Miami. I can't remember which one of those, but it was just fun to do something new. You know, WOCN was the first one to really first specialty nursing organization to have a certification, and to be a part of that was just really exciting. So for me, it was kind of a personal expectation that's a standard that I would want to achieve in my practice.
This is Jan Colwell. I have to admit I was a little nervous when I thought certification. Do I really, can I do it? It was kind of, I think as Ruth said, kind of a personal recognition that I did know what I knew, but I still was nervous. And I think the other thing is it was for me an attempt to elevate my practice, to know that I met that standard of care and could tell other people that I met it too. And despite being nervous, everything was fine. I hear that from my students all the time. I'm nervous. Do I really know it? And in fact, I think most of us do, but nervous I was, and I know my students continue to be that.
This is Bonnie Rolstad, and what I can honestly say is that I was on the board of directors at the time we voted for certification, and that was many years ago now, and I also knew that I would need to sit for my certification after approving board certification. So like Jan, I was nervous about what was really going to happen, but I did feel also that it would elevate my status, verify my credibility. And at the time, it was in the late 70s, I was heading into a program director position at Abbott Northwestern. So I needed to be certified. And in order to be a leader in an education environment, you have to be certified as well as master's prepared. So all of those things now are in place.
This is Mary. And I was the first ET nurse at University of Iowa in Iowa City, Iowa. And when the certification came about, I thought to myself, well, if I don't get certified, I bet they'll hire somebody that does have their certification, and I loved my job. So I decided to go to Chicago and take one of those first certification exams.
Thank you. Another question I have is, well, since you became certified, WOCNCB certified, what do you see as being some of the biggest changes in your practice or role?
Well, I guess I could start that conversation. I have seen an incredible increase in the acuity of the patients that I help to manage. And because of that, fairly early in my career, I realized that I needed more education. So as my colleagues here probably will agree with me, I went to school when I was an enterostomal therapy program. And the only thing that I studied was ostomy care. And I quickly realized that I needed more education, especially if I was going to sit for certification. So I started a master's program. And I think the whole evolution of our practice into advanced practice nursing, I think, is remarkable. And it certainly is the right thing for, at least for myself, and I think for many of us. So the biggest change for me is just how difficult some of our patients can be to manage, and how we need a much higher level of skills in many of the settings that we're in.
And I agree with you, Jan, and I can also say, this is Bonnie Rolstad, that evidence-based practice has taken the forefront in what we're doing, and that is really different because there's more research now, there's better research now than there ever was, and now we're teaching evidence-based practice. We're practicing with evidence rather than anecdotal practice. So I think that's just a huge thing, and we teach, of course, evidence-based practice in almost all of what we do. And so I'm an educator, so I teach online, as you know, and so I don't work with patients at this particular time, but we teach evidence-based practice constantly and research. So one of the things that nurses now need to know is the literature. That's really important. They needed to know it before, but now they really need to know it.
I think to add to what Bonnie and Jan really have said is, for me, agree with the evidence-based practice and agree that our patients are more and more complex, and the advanced education is really important. We had critically ill patients, we had complex patients, we have even more complex patients now. So now some of the skills are really dealing with the complexity of the patient, but also dealing with the complexity of the healthcare system with all the different disciplines, being more collaborative, being able to, and like Bonnie says, knowing the evidence to justify what you're asking and saying, being really assertive a lot of times, and to be able to defend why this is what needs to happen next, that the provider may not realize or the nurse practitioner may not realize. And I think we've always had to justify our role, and it's even more important now. We have to continuously justify why a board certified WOC nurse is the right person to have here right now, not someone who happens to may have advanced practice, but not certification in WOC nursing. I think the other thing that's challenging is we have to be very cognizant of how to defend and justify the WOCN certification versus other wound certifications that exist. There's a big difference, and that was, I know, always a big part of any education program I participated in, was helping people to understand how to articulate that difference.
I agree to what everyone has said here. And throughout my career, I have always had nursing students working with me. And I have always said to them, try to obtain the highest degree that you can. Now I've been saying the last few years, get your DNP if you can. Become certified and then go on to school if you can. But I've always just encouraged the nursing students to keep getting educated and obtain the highest degree that they can.
Mary, I totally agree with you. And this is Bonnie Rolstad. What I would also add is that continuing education is very important. And so the 75% of the practicing WOC nurses are bachelor's prepared. They are not advanced practice nurses. And we need to remember that, because they are the hands and the feet of our specialty. And so as we're teaching, we need to be sure and remember we're not all teaching in major medical centers, which, as you know, WebWalk is all across the board. And so they're an online program. So that means we have learners from all over the United States and Canada. And so we have to be sure we focused on entry-level practice for them, because most of them are bachelor's prepared.
Yeah, and focusing on that, like that, Bonnie, is really a launch pad then for them in their careers. So it really helps spur them on. I agree totally that we can teach people at the baccalaureate level, and really their job then is to maintain that expertise by continuing education and reading the articles. And then hopefully they'll want to go on and advance their career.
Thank you. And I can tell you, I've actually had Mary tell me, keep going, get your master's. So I've heard this, and I will tell you that, yeah, all of you in some way, shape, or form have personally pushed me, whether it's just going through the woundostomy continence education program, whether it is having to do research and coming across one of Jan's articles here, and of course having Mary tell me, go get your master's. So thank you. I'd like to kind of build a little bit off of the practice changes and just ask about, what are the biggest changes or innovations that you have seen, or even moving into what changes with best practice that really jumped out at you?
I think technology, Bonnie Rolstad here, is one of the big things. And that is, technology has impacted the world in which we live. It's given people opportunities to gain access to content they would have never known about before. When Ruth and I started the WebWalk Nursing Education Program, it was before the iPhone was invented. Okay, can you imagine that? And so, but it was recognizing, we had both been program directors at that time, it was recognizing that this education needs to go farther. Now we have telemedicine as well. We have all the electronic medical records. I mean, we have so much technology around us that I think that that's one of the big impacts in our practice. And students can go listen to videos on things they could never have seen before. If they're curious about topics, now they may see the incorrect information, but that's okay. At least they have questions.
Yeah, technology is huge. I agree. My son learns a lot of things. He doesn't know how to do something. He goes, I'll just go to YouTube and find it. And I'm like, oh, that's so true. But the other thing, I was thinking about this question a lot. And the other thing I think that I really appreciate that's changed is the rigor of the work we do and the research and the papers that we write now. You know, and I think we mentioned this before, a lot of things were opinion based. That's where we started. In the 80s, really, it was a lot of 70s and 80s. It was expert opinion based, where you have to start somewhere. But now, just the rigor of what we see published in the JWOCN, or we see published in many other journals, is really, it's just great to see how we're building science and evidence to really support wound care, to support ostomy care and incontinence care. It's not just, you know, what we're seeing and therefore deducing as the best way to practice. It's becoming the standard. I think that's really significant.
I think this is Mary Gloeckner, and I think since I started in the 1970s, in 1976, I came back from school, and I think I had 2 different ostomy pouches, and that's all that was available back in 1976. And so I had to put either one pouch or the other pouch on all of my ostomy patients. And so over the years, I mean, all the product innovations that we've seen, I think all of us on this panel have just seen so many improvements in the products, both in wound supply or wound care and ostomy care.
And this is Jan, again, from a clinical perspective, I am amazed how educated my patients are before they come to see me, especially the pre-op people. They know a whole lot that we build on now instead of starting with no knowledge. And I'm grateful for that. I think there's lots of sources and it really helps that adjustment. And I think the other thing that's impacted my practice, probably because I have been practicing for so long, is the short stay in the hospitals now. I think when I first started, people would come in pre-operatively 1 or 2 days, had plenty of time to prepare them, and they would stay 1 or 2 weeks very, very easily. And the amount of care we were able to give them in that period of time could be modulated to where they were, what their needs were. We had time. And now we have the exact opposite. Admission of the day of and discharge sometimes within 3 days. And that has really impacted the way that we provide care. And it's made us look outside the hospital for what else can we do when that person leaves the hospital. So that's been a dramatic change, I think, in most of our practices.
You guys make me think of other situations too. I don't know if you think about technology changes, I'm sure you remember the reusable face plates and all that's the only way you could get convexity at one time was reusable face plates. And remember, patients would come into the clinic and you would take the drill and drill it out bigger. Remember? And remember how we would modify things. We'd make concoctions in the hospital at the bedside to use for patients. You would never do that now, but because now they're available. But I mean, we innovated at the time. That was totally innovation. But now when you talk about face plates and and double face adhesive disc and all that, it's like I'm sure you get blank stares, not knowing what you're talking about.
This is Bonnie Rolstad, and I just want to dovetail on those statements. So true, Ruth. When I started practicing in the early 70s, and I realize I'm one of the oldest people on this panel, which is not good, but now the level of sophistication in the kind of products that we use is so impressive. The kind of clinical studies that have been done, the few allergic contact dermatitis that we see because the products have been so tested before they ever get into our hands. So I think the manufacturers have been working right along with us to make things better and better as we move forward. And that's really important for patient care. And it's really changed the type of complications that we see because we don't see as common of allergic contact dermatitis, as I mentioned, as we used to. And now we're dealing with completely different types of things.
Something else that I've seen change drastically is I remember patients didn't know where to get their supplies, either ostomy or for wound care, and they'd have to drive. I remember patients from Iowa having to drive 100 miles to a pharmacy so that they could get their ostomy supplies. And now everybody orders both wound care supplies and ostomy supplies online. So such a huge improvement.
It sounds like you all were really the original MacGyvers of nursing here with how you've had to make what you had work for you and work for the patients, and really probably identifying all those needs is what has brought us to where we're at with a lot of these innovations. I'd like to kind of go back to a couple years ago, which I'd like to forget that 2020 year. I think most of us would, but it had a huge impact on healthcare providers and at all levels. And since the pandemic, many nurses retired. What made you stay?
This is Ruth. I know for me, I wasn't ready yet. I wanted to stay. I wanted to make a difference. It was a new kind of challenge. I wasn't seeing patients directly, but I was indirectly consulting on the weird things we were seeing with our COVID patients, and then also working on staffing and other issues. And I just wasn't ready to give it up. I wanted to stay around and learn, because it's kind of exciting to see all these weird things developing and new opportunities, and be a part of the change.
And this is Jana. I feel the same way as Ruth. It wasn't a thought, to be quite honest with you, but it was a challenge because I work in the outpatient area, and we had to decide: were we changing our delivery of care in any way? And we still had patients who needed to have surgery regardless of a virus. So, I think of the cancer patients in particular, really, really could not wait. And the challenges that came to us where the patient had to come to clinic by themselves for a pre-op visit, very painful. But then we learned from that. We learned, well, why don't we do a virtual visit with their family members? Or why don't we get that at least taped for them? Or, let's get on the phone at the minimum. And you kind of learn very quickly who has technology and who doesn't. We think everyone knows that, but when I say, well, let's do FaceTime, that's a flip phone that they pull out, So we learned a lot, and I think I'm grateful that I continued to practice during this time, because it's changed my practice in many ways, in many good ways. But it was also painful, especially at the beginning, when there were so many limits to what you could do with patients, and patients were very upset and lonely when they came to talk to you about, especially a bad cancer, and they didn't have that significant other next to them. And so my heart would go to them, and I'm grateful that I was there, because frankly, we had to be their support people. So it was nurses who became their support people, and everyone in our facility rallied around patients for that.
Hi, this is Bonnie Rolstad, and I totally agree with all of what I've heard so far, of course, but we entered a very challenging time, and Ruth, unfortunately, is an adventure seeker also, and we've spent many years working together. And now WebWOC found our applications and students coming into our program increased exponentially with the COVID problem and with the pandemic. And so we saw enormous numbers of people coming into specialty practice. And I think they saw the wounds. They saw that they didn't know how to handle things. They wanted to move into a more controllable state where they didn't have to know everything about every patient. It was fascinating watching them. There are a number of articles that have been published on what we learned from the COVID and post-COVID information. And we learned a lot about educating people and their families. There, as you mentioned, Jan, there are so many things that we learned that we need to take away and keep. We can't let those lessons go away, because we learned a lot about how to be much more progressive and how to be more supportive in many ways. We can reach out to people without ever seeing them or touching them. We had people coming into clinical practicum, because we were doing a virtual practicum at the time also, because they couldn't get into settings, and they couldn't do an on-site clinical practicum. And so they were coming in, and we had people with COVID coming into VCP, the virtual clinical practicum. We had people whose family was just getting over COVID. We had people who were pregnant. I mean, it was unbelievable watching the kind of people who were coming because they had access.
Another reason that I decided to stay in as a certified nurse is because I see so many nurses that aren't certified, and they want to call themselves a wound nurse or an ostomy nurse. And I was so concerned. I had so much I wanted to teach these nurses before I retired. So every time I thought about retiring, I just decided I'm not ready yet. I need to work with some more nurses and teach them more about ostomy and wound care, and also the value of being certified. So I hope I have made that impact on several nurses to go back and get their certification.
Can I say one more thing? This is Bonnie Rolstad. I'm sorry, but I always have an opinion. One of our faculty members said something that I thought summed this answer up perfectly. And she said, I didn't know we could retire from WOC nursing, which is what Mary just said also. And that is, when you're talking to the pioneers and the veterans in the specialty, which is what you're talking to in this particular webcast or podcast, you're talking to people who have dedicated their lives doing this. And so the question of stopping is really interesting. People say to me many times, when are you going to retire? When are you going to retire? Well, I'm teaching more now because there are more people coming into the arena and evidence-based practice has become so important. So I didn't know we could retire from WOC nursing.
Yeah, I think that the point there is really valid that you guys are making, because that's what brought us in to the specialty. We love it. We are committed to it. It's so challenging and it's rewarding, not only in how you treat the patients and the satisfaction from helping them enhance their lives. Basically, you help them get through a crisis that nobody else really can do as well as you're going to do. And we also see the value, we also see the reward from staff nurses who go, wow, that sounds really amazing. Thank you. And that they're really motivated by that. And we see the reward from providers who really appreciate the impact we can have. So who wants to give that up? It's also positive, and we can redefine what we do all the time. We can, so even though you might retire from one aspect of what you're doing, it doesn't go away. There'll be other opportunities that always come up that you can engage in. And that's really the beauty of our specialty in the first place, that you can continue to give and contribute and receive all at the same time.
You know, Ruth, you made me think of something. This is Jan. We recently at our institution had to justify a role that someone left, and we needed to justify filling it at a time when they were considering not filling positions. And one of the arguments that we made was, we do something that nobody else does. So when we don't have that person, who is going to be that person that fills in? And certainly the staff nurses can do some of what we do, but at the level that we do it, when we're called in for the difficult patients, for those consults, if I don't have a person to take care of that patient, there's not a resident who's going to do it. There's not another advanced practice nurse who's going to do it. And I think that makes us so unique in what we do, especially, you know, the argument for us was, well, listen, there's a lot of other advanced practice providers in the institution. Can't one of them take over? And the answer is no, not without our training, not without our education, not without our certification. And I think that really makes us unique. And it's an argument that we need to always keep in our back pocket when we're looking at our services wherever we're at.
And we have to make sure other people know that. We have to articulate it. We can't assume. So we have to be confident in ourselves to be able to say that and promote our specialty and certification for exactly that reason, Jen. That is really a great example.
I agree. It's sometimes I hear a nurse is a nurse is a nurse, and those that say that could not be more wrong on that. We definitely have a specialty and specialized knowledge, and I think getting into the specialty, it is a bit of a calling. Not everybody is set up to do this or really has what it takes to do it, in my own humble opinion here. So I've got a quote here I'm going to read off to you, and I've got a few questions after this quote. But when you're a nurse, you know that every day you will touch a life, or a life will touch yours. Do you have any moments of where this may have happened for you?
This is Bonnie Rolstad. I remember vividly, because I did see this question and I thought, it's hard to think about nursing students, yes, things that you've seen, yes. But in 1980, I saw a patient who came into the outpatient clinic to be pre-op for an ileal pouch anal anastomosis. And at that time, we were teaching it in the school as an experimental procedure. There were 2 articles in the literature on this, and I happened to know both of them because I was teaching it. And I saw this patient, I thought, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. This is what this patient is going to have. And I remember it vividly. I remember his name vividly. It's just amazing. And it was very inspirational because when you become an ostomy care nurse, and most of us became ETs first, we were studying about incontinent stomas. Now we're dealing with restorative procedures, and that's very exciting to me. We're talking about people who are avoiding permanent stomas because they're having restorative procedures. So I remember that patient very thoroughly. I remember his progress. I remember his post-op visits, and it was very inspirational to me.
One of my patients, so I have a habit of in clinic walking my patients to the front door and thanking them for coming and, tell them let's keep in touch or go make an appointment or whatever. It just feels like a good closure to the end of our clinic visit. And one time, one of my kind of chronic patients, she had a lot of issues, came in and she said, I have to share with you what I see in the waiting room. I know that everyone in the waiting room is waiting to see you or your colleague. We're all kind of in the same boat and we're all very nervous. We're not looking at each other. We're touching our abdomens. We're making sure we have our supplies. We come in and then I watch when you walk the people to the door. And when you walk the person to the door, he or she's relaxed, they're smiling, they look at us all, they kind of wave and they walk out. And she said, do you have any idea why? It's because they came in and saw you. And I still kind of choke up when I think of that story because that's very objective. I know what I do makes the difference. I know I'm good at what I do and I help people. But that was a lady who sat in the waiting room, and she told that story just kind of tells it all for me, makes me feel good to this point. And I think the other story that we probably all have in our back pocket is, especially pre-op visits, when you're sitting across from someone and you're educating them and they're not looking at your eyes and they're not looking at you at all and they're kind of looking at the book you have in front of you or the diagram, and by the end we're making eye contact and they're smiling and they seem relaxed. That always is amazing to me, how we can do that in a short period of time, because it's all about the connection, right? It's the connection we make with that person and helping them to see where they're going to be, and they suddenly start to trust that what I'm doing is going to help them. That has always made a big difference for me in my practice, and it tells me it's good. It's a good thing.
Yeah, when you begin to think back about all the people you've been in touch with, patients or staff you've been in connection with, or students, one memory leads to another memory, so you're just kind of flooded with all these thoughts. But I think about the impact on neonates we used to take care of, both here in Minneapolis and also in Spokane, and the preemies and how scared the parents are, and you come in and you let them know what's kind of to expect and how things are going to go, and then you see the baby in 3 months come back to you in the clinic, and oh my gosh, they're so changed, and they're developing and crawling around and they have their onesie on. And it's all, I guess you see how, and you can say the same thing. I remember, 13-year-old girls, with ulcerative colitis and having to have a procedure, and just helping them through all that, and just how relieved they were to not be so scared, basically, and to know that they could get through this and we could help them get through this. And it all just makes, it's all really definitely gratifying. There's wound examples too. I remember taking care of a woman in Spokane who had a lot of skin loss from a really rare disease, POEMS, and she couldn't be grafted, and basically they just let the wound care nurses manage it. And we were able to get her to apply some grafting, Apligraft, to her, and she was in the hospital for 6 months with these wounds, and she never once got a wound infection, Pseudomonas or anything with her wounds. We changed the dressings and used the vac to help secure the grafts. And so a year and a half later, I kind of lost track of her after she was discharged to skilled care and then went home. And a year and a half later, I happened to be going to church, and all of a sudden I heard this person saying, Ruth, Ruth. And I turned around, and there was this beautiful young woman who had long hair now. She was real I mean, it was just, I'm like, oh my gosh, I hardly recognized her, it was just, I mean, that brought me to tears just to see her resuming life. And, that's the stuff that changes you and makes you really appreciate the impact you have on each individual person. You may not know it at the time, but you do. You have a big impact.
I think we all probably have so many patients like that we just always remember. One of the patients I remember most, he was a young man and he had jumped off a train in Rock Island, Illinois, and he lost 3 of his limbs. Both his legs were severed and had to be amputated, and one of his arms up at the shoulder. And so he just had one arm. And I think he was about 18 when that happened. And so he had lots of wound vacs. And so I would go change those. And I spent so much time in his room, every day. And so, we'd talk about things, we'd watch things on TV while I was changing his wound vacs. I'd never watched the History Channel before. And I remember I learned so much from him about the History Channel. But anyway, he eventually, healed and got married. And then he stayed in touch with me. And so every semester I would be asked to give a wound and an ostomy lecture over at our College of Nursing. So I started bringing him with me. This man with he had braces then on both legs, and he'd come to class with me. And the nursing students loved seeing him and hearing his story. And I just think as certified wound ostomy nurses, we spend so much time one-on-one, with patients, and we really do get close with them and increase their confidence, and we know we make a difference.
I agree. Even in my own experience here, it's truly about building relationships with patients. And I think certified wound ostomy continence nurses really have that unique ability to do that. Thank you for those stories. I was getting a little teared up on a couple of them here. What advice would you give to a new nurse who is starting out?
Be a sponge. Listen, read, make yourself available, open your eyes, and wait for what really strikes your particular desires as to where you want to go and what you want to focus on in your career. And then just open the doors and don't worry about what's going to happen next. Just go for it. But be a sponge, read, go to conferences, listen to experts, be available.
This is Jan. So it's kind of interesting. Our medical assistant, who I adored, just finished her bachelor's program. And she just started 2 weeks ago up on the floor at the university. And we all sat around a little congratulatory party and gave her advice. And I think the best advice that I heard from someone, it wasn't me, was just continually ask questions. Don't worry about the type of question that you ask. Just ask it. Don't worry about being dumb or showing that you don't know anything. No one knows everything. You've got a good basis to start out with, but asking questions is really important. And the other thing that she was told was the whole, remember that you're developing relationships. It's kind of what we've all talked about with your patients. It's not just about making sure you know how to put the IV in or titrate the medication. It's also getting to know that person and providing that care for that patient in particular. And I think both of those things were great advice. It seems so long ago that I started. I kind of wish I had that advice when I started. And I could tell, just it kind of clicked with her. She started to smile because she was so worried. Am I going to pass my NCLEX? Am I going to do this? What shift should I work? She didn't think about that. Okay, now I'm in front of a patient and I don't know what I'm doing, or what do I do? You just admit what you know and you don't know, and you move on.
And this is Mary Gloeckner. I always say to young nurses, don't be afraid of change, because like the 4 of us, we've been nurses for almost 50 years. each of us. And we've all been through a lot of change. I mean, I remember going through hospital mergers and going from paper charting to computer charting. And I remember some people would quit because they're like, oh, I don't want to chart on a computer. I don't want to do this online stuff. And so, people would get mad and quit. And I just say to young nurses, don't be afraid of change. There's going to be change in your career, and just go with it.
Hi, this is Bonnie Rolstad. I totally agree with what you're saying, Mary, and I think that's what keeps us fresh. I think, and I'll just repeat a couple things that I've already said. One is that you need to know the literature. We're practicing evidence-based practice now. And so I really want to talk about the nurse who's becoming a specialist, if it's okay, and certifying, because that's where my life really is. So you need to know the literature, you need to practice the literature, you need to embrace new ideas. Don't be afraid of innovation. That's really important. And I think that's almost preaching to the choir, because I have found nurses to be so flexible and trying to get ahead all the time in their careers. Recognize very early in your career that you're a change agent. As you become a certified WOC nurse, or whatever scope you're practicing, that when you come into this facility, you're going to be creating some level of change gradually as you go forward. And then I would always say that you need to hold on to your ethics. We're going to be challenged. There will be times when there'll be a much easier route to getting where you need to go. And you need to hang on to your ethics, respect for others, and the basic general things that people consider to be values in their life. And the other final thing I would say is that your career path is never linear. It's always going to move in various directions. Be ready to make those changes, because that's where growth happens. That's where innovation happens. And that's how our specialty stays fresh for what it's doing in certifying WOC nurses.
Thank you. Those are great pearls of wisdom from each of you. And I really appreciate the time that you've taken to speak with us today, and just your overall, all that you've done to continue to promote our specialty in nursing. It's really inspiring for me. Thank you so much.
This has been a truly inspiring conversation. Thank you for helping WOCNCB celebrate 45 years by sharing your stories, being mentors to others, and being true WOCNCB certification inspirations. Thank you for listening. WOCNCB sets the standard for wound, ostomy, continence, and foot care nursing certification by validating nurses' knowledge to provide safe, patient-centered care. Until next time, visit WOCNCB.org to learn more, or contact WOCNCB at info@WOCNCB.org. And remember to follow us on social media. This podcast is produced by WOCNCB. Take care.